In its truest sense, science is designed to be constantly updated with new information. As we ask science to tell us more about ourselves, our relationship to our bodies, to one another, to the earth, to the past, to the future, how things work in this world, science finds new answers, and they offer those answers. And sometimes we, maybe not you and me, but sometimes we as a society, we have such an attachment to another answer that we like that we're reluctant to embrace what the new discoveries are telling us. And because of that, there is a tendency to become stuck in a story, a scientific story of us and our relationship to the world. And if you were educated in the West, anytime in the last 150 years, what I want to say is you and myself, we're in this together. We are the product of a way of thinking based in scientific assumptions that now have been proven to be false assumptions. We know they're false in the peer-reviewed science, yet there is a reluctance, in some cases a flat-out resistance, to share them in the mainstream media, in the classrooms, and the textbooks. So what that means is that we are now educating entire new generations with the same thinking of unsustainable principles of economics, of energy, of agriculture, of social interactions, families, relationships, the same unsustainable ways of thinking. We are steeping a new generation in those unsustainable ways of thinking while we're asking that generation to solve the problems that we are leaving behind, and those problems exist because of the unsustainable ways of thinking that we embraced as we created the world around us. So science, I just want to begin by saying I think science is good. I am a scientist. I'm a trained earth scientist, a geologist. And I also want to be the first to say here, to acknowledge that science does not have all the answers.
Você vai fazer essas afirmações e trabalhar com toda a positividade, com toda a boa vontade, do qual sua vida precisa. Vamos lá. Essas afirmações positivas podem te ajudar a estiver procurando melhorar o seu desempenho profissional. Minha carreira me aproxima da minha família. Meu emprego me traz abundância financeira. Eu atraio novos clientes todos os dias. Meu entusiasmo em relação ao meu emprego é contagiante. Eu irradio sucesso. Muito bem.
Science tells us how things work, the nuts and bolts of how atoms and subatomic particles and molecules and cells, how they work. Science tells us how the things work. But science cannot tell us how to apply that knowledge in our lives. That is where I believe that we owe it to ourselves to honor the wisdom of all of those who have come before us, the wisdom of 5,000 years of ancient and indigenous traditions. They didn't know the science so much, but they understood us, and they understood our relationship to the world. They knew how to survive difficult times, and rather than spending the time to understand why things are the way they are, our ancestors preferred to apply those understandings in their lives so that they would have healthier lives for themselves, their families, their communities. So for me, this wisdom that we are going to explore in this program, the wisdom of science and spirituality. Science tells us how things work, and the spiritual principles help us to understand how we apply that knowledge in our lives. In its truest sense, spirituality, I just want to make a distinction here. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about spiritual principles. Spirituality is the exploration of us, our connection to ourselves, to one another, to the world. And the spiritual principles existed long before religions ever came along. The religions came later and wrapped the rules and the dogma around more ancient understandings. And as you'll see as we go through the program, that's why I have preferred to go directly to the source of this ancient wisdom, some of the most isolated, magnificent, remote, beautiful, pristine places remaining on the earth today. Usually they're on mountaintops, somewhere very few people go, because it's in those places that this wisdom of our ancestors is least disturbed by the modern world, and it's in those places we find it more intact. And I'm not suggesting that we want to go and live like our ancestors lived. What I am saying is I believe they knew things. They understood principles in their time that we may apply in our lives today. We can take those principles and apply them in a smart way, in a healthy and a responsible way in the modern world, going through some of the same problems that our ancestors experienced, such as climate change. So in its truest sense, spirituality is about us. It's about our connection to ourselves, one another, and the world. Interestingly, science is the same thing. Science is the exploration of us. It's all about us. Our connection to ourselves, to one another in the world, how things work. So for me, the marriage of these two, if we can marry the best science of the 20th and now the 21st century to 5,000 years of wisdom and spiritual traditions from those who have come before us, maybe, just maybe, we give ourselves an evolutionary edge that our ancestors did not have because they didn't have the science. Maybe we give ourselves the evolutionary edge to move beyond the hardship and the suffering brought about by the cycles of change that we're experiencing now, and for the first time in recorded human history, not just survive, but transcend, transform our lives, transform our world, and transcend these challenges because we have become more knowledgeable about ourselves and our relationship to the world.
Frases de sabedoria e otimismo. Ter sabedoria ao tomar qualquer decisão é muito importante para evitarmos machucar o próximo. Você se torna sábio a partir de muita reflexão sobre as coisas e pessoas. O dinheiro faz homens ricos. O conhecimento faz homens sábios. E a humildade faz grandes homens. A gente vive esperando que as coisas mudem, que as pessoas mudem. Até que um dia a gente muda e vê que nada mais precisa mudar. O fraco jamais perdoa. O perdão é uma das características do forte.